The Witch has been in the game for over a decade and over time has received many different updates and balance changes. It is also one of the most unique troops in the game as it is the only one that actually spawns in additional troops. And today we will be going over the full history of this very unique troop, as well as the builder base, Super Troop, and the new Golem Witch versions. The Witch was added in July of 2013 to become the 5th Dark Elixir troop in Clash of Clans. But the whole concept for the Witch was actually created in November of 2012 when a user going by Iron999 Gary created a post on the Clash of Clans forum giving some ideas for new troops. One of these suggestions was a Necromancer, and something else that is interesting is a mention of a catapult, since that was also something else I ended up adding to the game. But back to the witches. This user also did mention witches that fly around on a broom, and it looks like Supercell combined these two ideas to create the witch that we all know today. Upon its release, the witch was able to be unlocked at Town Hall 9, but a lot of people were able to use it to attack Town Hall 8, which made them even better. The witch had a really long range of 5 tiles, which was the farthest of any troop in the game at the time, and this made them really good. The witches were able to snipe buildings on the outside of bases, and since it didn't do too much damage, they were able to spawn in a lot of skeletons in that time, which would all really help out the attack. And about a month later, the witches got nerfed, so their attacking range went from 5 to 3 tiles, which is the same as the wizard. But the witches were still really good, and that is because of the skeletons. These guys played a big role in many different attacks. First of all, they were really good at distracting the defenses, like cannons and archer towers, which made it easy for the witches and other troops to destroy them, especially because the witches had extremely little health at the time. They only had about 2 to 3 times the health of the skeletons. And the skeletons were also good since they were very fast, which meant 2 things. The first one being that they were really useful for finding and setting off traps so that they didn't affect the rest of the army, and the second one being that they were able to destroy walls fairly quickly because of just how many there were. And at the beginning, the witches were typically used with giants, wizards, archers, and sometimes even healers. The original armies using witches were quite random as it was a bit hard trying to find a place for them, mainly due to their extremely low health and the nerfed range. But eventually people came up with the Go Wee Wee strategy, which primarily used golems, wizards, and witches, though other troops like wall breakers were also used. This strategy was the best for Town Halls 9 and 10, and I will get to why in just a little bit. But first, let me explain just what the strategy was and why it worked. The golems will be placed first so they could tank, since that's just what golems do, and then you would place some wall breakers to create the initial openings into the base. After that, the witches will be placed behind the golems so that they could start spawning in their skeletons to get rid of whatever buildings there were, and to also run ahead of the golems to trigger any possible traps. And finally, the wizards would come last because they did the most DPS and were good for cleanup and taking out some defenses. This was considered to be one of, if not the best attacking strategy for Town Hall 9 at the time, and was also still very effective at Town Hall 10, though there were definitely some drawbacks for Town Hall 10, with the main one being the Inferno Towers. If they were single targets, then that was perfect as the skeletons could easily distract them, giving enough time for the rest of the troops to destroy them. But if there was one multi-target, then that made the attack harder as you would really have to focus on the side of the base that the tower was on to get rid of it quickly, which would make the attack harder. And if there were 2 multi-targets, then it would be really hard to 3-star base since both of them would just tear through your army. Plus, in March of 2016, the witches were heavily nerfed in that those skeletons' HP was reduced and they no longer triggered traps. The HP wasn't really that big of an issue since skeletons died quickly anyways, but the traps part was really bad as that was one of the best things they were good for. This did nerf the Go Wee Wee attack a bit, but it was still really good for Town Hall 9, especially because in October of 2016 the witches got a massive buff where their health was almost tripled. This was possibly to balance them out since the bomb tower also got added in the same update, and as you can probably guess, the bomb tower was a massive nerf when it came to the skeletons from the witches, since the bomb tower did splash damage and it threw the bombs fairly quickly, which wouldn't give enough time for the witches to spawn in more skeletons and would have led to them getting killed very quickly if they didn't buff the health. The Go Wee Wee strategy is so iconic that in the latest event there is even a troop combining the golem and witch, and we will talk more about that later. In December of 2016, the witch got another buff where she got a big increase in damage and a bit more health. This buff and the previous buff both contributed to a couple of new attacking strategies for Town Hall 11, which was released just at the end of 2015. There were 3 main attacking strategies using the witches at this Town Hall level: the Mass Zap witch attack, an attack using golems, witches, and bowlers, and another one also incorporating ice golems. But one thing to mention is that a lot of these strategies really got popular because of the introduction of siege machines in Town Hall 12. Before them, the strategies were still used, but just not as much. Starting with the Zap Witch strategy, it gets its name from the lightning spells utilizing the attack, and their main purpose is to get rid of at least one Inferno Tower and try to deal as much damage to the other one, as well as the Eagle Artillery if they are close together. After that, it is really just a case of placing the golems, log launcher, and witches to deal with the rest of the base. And other troops like baby dragons or wizards are also utilized sometimes. And the next attack we're going to talk about at Town Hall 11 is a mix of ice golems, witches, and bowlers. This is definitely a big charge attack as you kind of spam everything in at once to hopefully steamroll through the enemy base. The ice golems tank for the witches and bowlers who are supposed to destroy all the buildings, and things like free spells are utilized to combat the Inferno Towers and Eagle Artillery. And the Zap Witch attack would carry on to be very good and useful at every single Town Hall level, but there would also be another strategy which would start becoming popular around Town Hall 13, and that was the Yeti Witch attack. This attack was similar to a lot of the previous ones, but it just incorporated Yetis into it. Though this attack would really seem to only be around for Town Hall 13, as after that the Zap Witch attack would take back over. And at Town Hall 15, there was also another really good attack strategy using the Electro Titan and the Witches. The Electro Titan would act as a tanker in this attack, but it also did a lot of damage and was a pretty good strategy, though it could be hard to pull off. Overall, the Zap Witch strategy is really the one that has stuck through all these Town Hall levels all the way from Town Hall 11, but there's also the Super Witch that we haven't even talked about yet. It was a Super Troop version of the Witch and was released in June of 2020. The Super Witch obviously has more health and damage than the normal Witch, as well as a longer range of 4 tiles compared to the 3 tiles of the normal Witch. But what makes her really special is her special ability. Instead of spawning in hordes of skeletons like the normal Witch, the Super Witch spawns in one big skeleton, which is way stronger than the normal skeletons. This one is called Big Boy, and only one of them can be active per witch, though a new one will spawn if the current one ends up dying. Using the Super Witch was a strategy that really became popular around Town Hall 13 and will carry all the way up to Town Hall 15. The Super Witch basically was a replacement for the normal Witch in many attacks, as it could also be used with things like Yetis and the lightning spells. As far as the history of the Super Witch goes, well, there really isn't much. She hasn't received any sort of changes that would affect the gameplay, as the only change is a reduction in training time and the addition of another level. So let's now move on to the builder-based counterpart called the Night Witch. The builder base was released in May of 2017, but the Night Witch was added a month later in June. She was very similar to the normal Witch, except for the fact that she spawned in bats instead of skeletons. As soon as it was released, the Night Witch became the most broken troop in the builder base, since you could just fill your army with them, spawn them at the corner of the enemy base, and by the time they reached the base, they had already spawned in tons of bats that could easily just destroy the enemy base. The air bomb defense alone couldn't deal enough splash damage to wipe out the bats quick enough, and obviously the air defenses or archer towers couldn't keep up with the massive amounts of bats that were flooding the base. This made it a really OP strategy for the lower builder hall levels, but as you got higher and unlocked things like the roaster, the mass Night Witch strategy really started dying down. Though, if the base was designed poorly, then the mass Night Witch attack could still be used to 3-star even at Builder Hall 9. But the introduction of Builder Base 2.0 really changed up all the attacking strategies and made the mass witches a lot harder since you could only have a couple in your army. But it was still possible to use them as long as you used a couple of other troops, though this definitely got rid of the easy spam nature of the Night Witch attacks. So right now the Night Witches are average at best in the Builder Base, but let's now move on to something very recent, which is the Golem Witch Mashup Troop. There is currently an event going on called Mashup Madness, and in the event multiple troops have been combined together to make one troop, with one of them being the Golem and the Witch. This, in a way, brings back the Go Weeby attack strategy for the higher tunnel levels. This troop combines the tankiness of the Golem with the skeleton spawning ability of the Witch, so it is basically a Golem that spawns in skeletons. And to make it even better, when it dies, it spawns in 3 big boys, which also combines the Super Witch into this troop. And even though it hasn't been out for that long, the Golem Witch troop is extremely OP because, like I just said, it combines the Golem, Witch, and Super Witch. And it can also be used in a spammy nature as a lot of these attacks. This makes it very fun to use and is a really good troop that brings the Go Weeby strategy to the higher tunnel levels where it normally wouldn't have been very good. Let me know in the comments which type of witch is your favorite, and I'll see you guys in the next video.